The strange thing about this, or one of the strange things about this election, is that a lot of people thought it was going to be a referendum on women's rights, bodily autonomy. I would argue those voters are already decided. If you're fiercely focused on bodily autonomy, you're going for Harris. If it's not a big issue for you, you're probably Trump. Or if you're pro-life, you're definitely Trump. I actually think the election is going to be decided based on who presents a more aspirational, effective vision of masculinity. And what you have on the far right is this vision of masculinity that I would argue is kind of, they would say it's being provocative, aggressive, speaking your mind, strength, right? Toughness. But the far right is basically saying, be a little bit coarse and cruel is how I would describe it. The far left, their vision of masculinity is be more like a woman. And neither of those seem to be resonating with men. If any of them resonates, it's the right around young men, around this vision of masculinity. What I would argue is that what we should, or the way to position it, you said that you were passionate about bodily autonomy, is the Democrats have not done a good job of convincing young men that bodily autonomy will affect them, specifically a lack thereof. If you want to be kind of cemented in poverty, have an unwanted child as a man. That's not going to help you economically. The case I've been making to young men when I did an endorsement of Vice President Harris is that I think if you polled a bunch of men under the age of 30 and said, would you rather have more opportunities for sex or less opportunities? I think the majority would say I'd rather have more opportunities for sex. What is going to happen to random opportunities for sex when if a woman gets pregnant, she might end up in an emergency room parking lot because the doctors won't treat her? If, say she's having a failed pregnancy and she's in sepsis, there are now instances where an emergency room doctors are worried about treating her for fear that they're going to be criminally prosecuted. What's going to happen if a young woman gets pregnant and has to carry the baby to term? Do you think she's more inclined to have random sex? So I think what we needed to do and we failed to do on the progressive side is to say the bodily autonomy affects men almost as much as it does young women. And that the economic policies of Harris will also give you, I mean, if I think about masculinity as being a provider, a protector, and a procreator. Provider. Who's going to give young men the chance to be the better provider? People think it's going to be Trump, that he's a better business person. He did have a strong economy under his administration, not as strong as the Biden administration, but the general view is he would offer a better economy. Which atmosphere am I more likely to be a good provider in? And they've done a better job of articulating that, even though I would argue the evidence is that whether it's Goldman Sachs or any investment bank that's done the math, they've said that the economic growth under the Harris policies would probably be stronger, especially when you take into account that if Trump enacts the tariffs he's talking about, 60% on all Chinese goods, and does anything resembling the war on immigration, legal and illegal, that he's articulated, that's a recipe for inflation. So I think the Republican Party has done a better job of convincing men you're going to have an easier time being a provider under our administration because look at him, he's a billionaire. We're about cutting taxes. We're about economic growth, drill, baby, drill. When I would argue the data does not reflect that. Protector. This is where I think we really blew it. And that is, and Michelle Obama gave a very powerful speech. I think your first instinct, your operating system as a man should be, your default operating system should be move to protection. Like real men break up fights at bars, they don't start them. Real men protect their country, they don't shitpost it. Real men have a real instinct, a reflex instinct. I felt this way very strongly when I was younger. It was very motivating for me to protect the women in their life, right? You know, I don't know if are you close with your mother?
Not really.
I'm sorry to hear that. I was very close with my mother. And the first time I ever thought I need to get my shit together professionally was when she got sick. And I had this immense feeling of like failure as a man because I couldn't take care of my mom at the level I wanted to. I think that's a really good default setting for a man to move to protection. You don't need to understand the LGBT community. You don't need to understand trans rights. You don't need to understand the nuances of legal or illegal immigration. But when you see a group being demonized, your default setting should be to protection. I think it comes naturally to men. Men are more inclined on the battlefield to run out and save a comrade and get shot than women. Women are more thoughtful. They're more like, is that a good idea? Wouldn't we be better retreating, planning, and then kicking the shit out? They're more thoughtful. They look at the fruit and say, is there pesticides in this? Whereas a guy sees movement in the bushes, grabs his spear and tries to go kill the thing and bring it back. They're more risk aggressive. And I think this default setting of protection is really powerful for men. And we haven't connected. And I thought Michelle Obama did an outstanding job trying to make the case that men need to have a default setting around protecting women. And women's rights are under real serious threat in the United States. It is becoming a little bit handmaid's tale. 21 states now restrict, to some extent, abortion. And the most mendacious thing about that is it's not a war on women. It's a war on poor women. Because if you have money and someone, your niece or your daughter, gets pregnant, you'll figure it out. You'll get a medical abortion. You'll have access to misoprostol. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, or can get her on a plane to a city where she can terminate the pregnancy. It's the 15 or 17-year-old Black girl who gets pregnant, doesn't have access to resources, single mother, doesn't have money, is embarrassed, and no one knows it until she's 5 months pregnant. That person is really screwed. So I would argue that the second leg of the masculinity stool here around protection is not been made that strongly or as forcefully as it should be around the democratic policies.
I was trying to think through the lens of a young man in the USA who is looking at both candidates and thinking, which one is going to allow me to be the protector the better? Mm-hmm. And again, this is where the economy comes back in, because I think to myself, well, if I'm rich, then I can take care of my mother.
100%.
If I'm rich, I can take care of my family. So if I want to be the big, strong protector, then I need to vote Trump because I'm going to get rich.
I think that's their message. And I would argue the data actually says something different, that if you look at the economic policies, the clearest signal we have of what policies would be under Harris would be to look at Biden's policies the last 4 years. As a matter of fact, she made a huge mistake on a big show called The View. They asked her how her policies would be different from Biden. And she says, I can't think of anything. And it's like, well, we didn't want to elect him again. Why would we want to elect you? It was a huge gap. And by the way, she's not good on her feet. I mean, we don't like to say that on the left. She's gotten better. She was outstanding in the debate because you could tell she practiced and had the split screen. She destroyed him during the debate. But on her feet, she's not nearly as good as him. He comes off, he says stupid things, but he's likable and funny. And
she thinks too much.
She's just...
You see her trying to mull for the perfect dance, whereas he just goes, blah, 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 blah. I walked into the room and I told Putin, stop that.
I said, wait. I mean, you said wait to the president of Russia. And also, if you want to see real sexism and misogyny in America, there's just no getting around it. She is graded on an entirely different curve than him. If she had ever been accused of sexual assault, if she'd said half the crazy shit he said, it just would be like everyone's hair on fire. She'd be totally disqualified. Van Jones, who I admire a lot, said, he's lawless. She has to be flawless. I mean, people are parsing her words. And then, he says the strangest, weirdest things that make no sense and seem sort of just ridiculous. So she's graded on an entirely different curve than him. But provider, right, they've done a better job. Protector, I think young men are starting to see that this is getting really serious around bodily autonomy and we're headed in the wrong direction. And then procreation and all these things are tied together. She's offering a first-time homebuyers tax credit, small business loans. Her tax policy would probably be better for young people, worse for older rich people, right? So I would argue that, and also at the end of the day, bodily autonomy, I go back to what I said earlier. Guys, if you're looking to have sex, you got to give women domain over their own person.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.